Once upon a time, an old man lived a quiet life, all by himself. Following a lifetime of traveling the globe, he settled in a little town in Mexico, a place as timeless as the man himself. Here, in a world untouched by the frenzy of selfies, Instagram, or Wi-Fi, days were spent more in the sun than under a roof. He carried out the same routine day in and day out for years and years, so much so that one could set their watch to it. And indeed, one villager did just that. Each morning, the old man would wake 7 minutes after sunrise, and precisely 3 minutes before the rooster crowed. He slipped into his dusty day's clothes. He started with his shirt and slowly worked his way down. His crimped back snapped and popped as he tied his boots, readying for the day's hike. Heading out, he grabbed an empty water pail and an empty knick-knack sack. He started slow, gradually quickening like a locomotive gaining momentum. Instead of a steam whistle, his grunts and pants marked his increasing pace. As he got closer and closer to town, the more people he began to see, some waving, smiling, or greeting him with a short word of "Hola" or "Buen dia," and rarely getting a response. He kept his head down and focused on making it to town, determined on his goal and not to be distracted by conversations. On lucky occasions, a local might receive a grunt or a yeah, but never with much enthusiasm. Exactly 63 minutes after he set off, he would arrive in the village. Never a minute early and never a minute late. He walked straight to the town well and placed down his water pail. Rarely was anyone at the well at this time of day, and if they had been, they'd know better than to be in this man's way. He opened the valve, but the well's pump took as long to ready as the man himself. It would take some time to fill his pail of water, and the man, not liking to waste time, immediately began walking to the nearby street vendors and shops. He bought various knick-knacks, buttons, agates, and handmade toys. His sack of knick-knacks was no longer empty, filled with inexpensive items. An odd collection of findings for a very odd and curious man indeed. By the time he finished his shopping, he'd return back to the water pail, always in time to turn off the valve before water spilled over the pail's lip. Except for one December day where he was late and water had formed a puddle all around his pail, but that is a day that we do not talk about and one likely the man would rather forget. As the man hoisted the water pail, its weight immediately bore down on his crimped back, tilting him to one side. To counter this lopsidedness, he adjusted the knick-knack sack in his other hand, using its weight to counterbalance the pail. This makeshift balance, though imperfect, eased the strain just enough. With both hands occupied and evenly burdened, he turned his steps towards home, his pace deliberate under the weight of his cargo. With each step towards home, the old man's pace became steadier, but the sun's intensity also grew. Periodically, he would pause for a sip of water from his pail, a ritual that required careful maneuvering to manage the imbalance caused by the shifting weight. Each drink slightly lightened the pail, inadvertently tilting the balance once more. To remedy this, after each sip, he would reach into his knick-knack sack. With a thoughtful glance, he'd select a small item, momentarily shifting his gaze from the path to scan for a passerby. On one such occasion, his eyes met those of a young boy rushing by. The old man grunted, beckoning the boy over with an outstretched hand. From the depths of the sack, he retrieved a small pack of Bubbaloo chewing gum, a favored local treat, and offered it to the boy. Delighted, the boy accepted it, thanking the old man with a cheerful "Gracias, Senor." The old man's response was a nonchalant yeah. Each item he gave away was a step towards rebalancing the weight, a careful dance of give and take that maintained the delicate equilibrium between his water pail and the sack of knick-knacks. This process repeated several times until his jug of water became lighter and lighter, and his sack of knick-knacks grew fewer and fewer, until eventually reaching back home. Returning home, the old man placed his sack of knick-knacks on the small wooden table, which served as the centerpiece of his single-room dwelling. Stepping into the kitchen area, a generous term for the corner of his house that contained an electric stove, he began his morning ritual. Each morning was marked by the preparation of matcha tea, as unique a habit as the man himself. He preferred his matcha unusually bitter, mirroring perhaps his own hardened exterior. This deviation from the traditional brewing method, where matcha is seldom made with boiling water, suited him well. Filling a pot with the day's water, He set it on the old stove, its slow heating a familiar routine. In a house devoid of modern conveniences like cell phone timers or microwave clocks, he had developed his own method to determine when the water reached its boiling point. A routine, much like the rest of his life, measured and deliberate, dictated not by the ticking of a clock, but by a rhythm honed by years of repetition. The man moved to his desk, easing into the chair that creaked and cracked. It was hard to tell whether the sounds came from the aged wood of the chair or from his own crimped back. He first took an index card from a neatly stacked pile and penned a short, repetitive note. The contents of these notes remained a mystery, always the same. After writing, he would delve into his sack of knickknacks, thoughtfully selecting an item to pair with the card. Each pair was then carefully placed into an envelope, upon which he wrote a random address and affixed a stamp. This routine just so happened to take as long as his old stove took to boil his water. By the time he finished, he'd return to the pot and add in his tea to make his favorite matcha drink. This is a routine that has since carried on year after year, day after day. The man led a relatively lonely life, but one he seemed content not to change. All until one day. One morning, 7 minutes past sunrise, the man was not yet awake. It wasn't the familiar, gentle light that stirred him, but the abrupt crow of the rooster. Startled, he sat up quickly, his mind a blur of confusion. In a rush that was uncharacteristic of his usual mornings, he stood up faster than normal, dressing hurriedly. Starting with his shirt, he moved quickly to his pants and boots. If he kept up this pace, he could still be on schedule, racing against time in a way he hadn't in years. Fully clothed, he turned to grab his empty knick-knack sack and then his water pail. As he bent to lift the pail, he rose too swiftly. Instead of the usual erect stance, his crimped back emitted a sharp creak, halting his rise midway. This abrupt sound, more of a crack than a creak, left him bent over, trapped in a stance halfway between sitting and standing. Unable to straighten up as he had done day after day, the old man was immobilized, his crimped back refusing to cooperate as it always had. Barely able to move, he dropped his pail and empty sack of knickknacks and hobbled over to his rocking chair. Grunting and groaning, he slowly sat as the chair creaked and cracked as much as his back. His back has had its last journey to the town well, and its last journey to fill his bag of knickknacks. The man looked over at his pot and jar of matcha. There will be no matcha for the man today. Then looking over at his desk of neatly stacked index cards and envelopes. There will be no writing cards to strangers. The man pondered and thought. There were no cell phones or email, texting or WhatsApp, no FaceTime or Zoom, nothing but his index cards and stamps. No way to get help, and thus the man was forced to accept his fate. Morning turned to afternoon, and afternoon turned to night. The man just sat in his rocking chair until the sun went down. Shuffling to his bed, he lay down to sleep. When the rooster crowed the next morning, he wasn't startled awake. He just lay there, eyes slowly opening. The rooster crowed and crowed some more, but the man didn't get up, didn't get dressed. He just lay in bed all day, thinking about his life and thinking about his thirst. Another day of the same, and the man found himself thinking less and less about life and more about water. Suddenly the man remembered many words for water that he had heard throughout his life. In Germany they called it Wasser, in Japan Mizu, and here in Mexico Aqua. As the man pondered about water, he heard a knock on the door. Grunting and groaning, he made some noise, but didn't get up. The door knocked again and again until he let out a loud, "Yeah, yeah." He got up from bed and barely made it to the door. Poking his head out to the left and then right, he saw nothing and let out a grunt. Then as he looked down, he saw a pail of water with a small knick-knack placed on top. As thirsty as he was, he didn't take a sip, headed over to the stove, pouring water into the pot. Waiting for the water to heat, he sat in his rocking chair, but this time not to mail off a knick-knack, but to admire the one he received. It was a beautiful hand-woven bracelet. He was so captivated by its beauty that he didn't notice the pot boiling over. Finally, making his bitter matcha, the old man quenched his thirst. Day after day this continued, waking up to the rooster and then followed by knocks. Never seeing anyone but just a pail and a knick-knack. Day after day he slowly regained his strength, and his empty sack of knick-knacks was no longer empty but overflowing. One day he didn't awake to the sound of a rooster crow, but to the sound of machinery. Loud beeping and hollering. The man arose from bed and shuffled to his door, opening it once more. This time an entire community is staring back at him. There must have been 100 eyes all awaiting a reaction, but the man said nothing and just stared back at them. There were neighbors and people from town, but there were also unfamiliar faces from all around. One person stepped forward and introduced himself. "Hello sir, I heard you were unwell. I saw it on the internet and thought I could help. So I flew from the other side of the world to come dig you a well. I don't think you know me, but I received this a long time ago and thought you should have it back." The person handed the man a tattered and old envelope, and the man reached out with his weathered old hands and opened it. Out slipped a knick-knack into his palm and an index card that simply said, "You are loved." A tear came to the old man's eye. Just a single drop would do. The man looked up at all the people and simply said, Yeah,